What's up, everybody? So what I have here are some colonized Grifola frondosa logs. I have them on white oak, and you guys will see the process that I went through to prepare these, but nonetheless, they're ready to go. They're super colonized, and what we're going to do is go ahead and get these in the ground. This is the tech for these, and a lot of other mushrooms you can use the same technique for. So what I'm going to start off with is some white oak logs. These are appropriate size, kind of just cut them down, and you can put them in a bucket, and then you want to fill that bucket or tote or container up with water and leave it for about 2 weeks. It's going to start to get all nasty and gunky looking like such, and after, you will just leave them out and let them dry overnight or a few hours. You don't want them dripping with water when you load them up into the bags. Otherwise, it's just going to cause issues with contamination. I was able to fit 3 of them in my pressure cooker like this, and I let them go for about 3.5 hours. But I also run them in the autoclave, and I use much bigger logs, as you'll see in the clave here, and I run it for about 5 hours instead. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and start the process of inoculating these, and then afterwards you would simply bury them outside. The reason we're doing it this way is simply because a lot of these species, the mycelium is a little bit more delicate. Contamination will take over before they're able to colonize the substrate, or they simply may just not colonize it at all. So when you get them in this environment where it's just them and the food, and you let them colonize it, then you can have it open air as you would any other colonized substrate. And these we just bury outside. And as I mentioned in the beginning, it also works with other species. So, if you wanted to do this with, which I have it, Fruit, Chicken of the Woods, and you can use it for cauliflower mushrooms and anything you think that might benefit from being in a more secure environment. We'll get those other ones later. So what we have here is some spawn from Mushroom Mountain. What's so cool about this is I actually know Lee. I used to work at Mushroom Mountain for about 3 years, and she found this one here in Clemson. Some really good genetics. When you're doing stuff like this, especially outside, it's nice if you can clone from your local environment, so you know that the strain is used to growing there, or find some growers in the area that have isolated some wild genetics. And you just want to punch it a bit. Don't punch through the bag, but then you break it up like I'm doing, and that's going to enable us to get the most out of this sawdust. And this is just such a great method for self-sustainability. There's all these different methods of cultivation. I mean, you bury these logs every year. You got some wood chips going of King Stropharia. You got some logs of shiitake and such. And, if you're going to try to provide food for yourself or the community, this is a great way to do it. And if you want to make your own products, this is a great way to do it, because Maitake is not very cheap to purchase, and I typically don't find enough of it to make a lot of products out of. So I figured I will just grow as much of it as I can outdoors. And when you do it this way, you still have a little bit more control of the watering aspect, because I do have places where the Maitake grow, but if it doesn't rain, I can't find them. So you basically just pour this in there like you would any bag, and depending on how much sawdust I have, I like to put a generous amount of the sawdust in there. You will find if you don't put enough in there, it will dry out in some spots that are more prone to contamination. It may stall out, which will just cause it to contaminate. And if the mycelium gets on there and it contaminates, all is not lost. I mean, if a good chunk of it is colonized, then you can just go ahead and put it outside and see if the contamination dies down and the mycelium gets a better foothold on it. And so we just continue on like this, and depending on your log size, you may have to have it vertical. Like right now I have it horizontal, but the other one that's over there that I just did, I have it sitting up. And then after
I have the bag sealed, I will kind of spread that sawdust around on the logs. It's quite remarkable how fast it jumps onto the logs with this method. I know it's a little nasty making that water go all anaerobic in the beginning and all that gunk, but it is a part of the process. It helps with some of the sterilization and it helps with the moisture content. You don't necessarily have to do it this way, but this is the way that I've had a lot of success with getting these logs colonized and fruiting. Now, sometimes you may see some water that's pooled on the bottom of the bags from the log itself. I would say just to put some extra substrate at the bottom and let some of the substrate soak up some of that extra moisture that's in there, opposed to letting the log sit on it. I have been able to recover some bags that way. And remember, it's typically every inch in diameter of how many years you can expect for the log to fruit. Now, the bigger the log, the longer it takes to fruit. But once again, the bigger the log, the longer it fruits. And I would love to see if you guys can find a way to get these bigger logs colonized. But at the moment, I'm pretty much working with some of the bigger bags that they make. And I am putting them in the autoclave as you have witnessed. In about a week to 10 days, these bags will be superficially colonized. And it's quite remarkable how fast it goes. And that's why I love this method, because the results are just, they've been phenomenal. Now, even though it's superficially colonized in 10 days, that doesn't mean go ahead and rip open the bag and put it outside. You want to be able to let that mycelium penetrate that dense wood. And so leave it for a few months. I mean, I've left it for 3-4 months before. If you do leave it longer than that, it may start to fruit in the bag. I have some that I will show you an example of. You may start to notice some browning of the mycelium. That is normal with the Maitake, so don't fret if you see that there. And as I mentioned, just leave it in the corner in the dark room for 3 to 4 months, and they can fruit in the same year. I did some of these back in February, and they fruited in the same year in October. And so here in a moment, I'm going to show you guys what they look like once they get superficially colonized, and then I'll show you what it looks like once they start to fruit. All right, let's take a look at some of these logs and see how colonized they are. And you might have noticed some of that liquid there by my hands. If the logs are too wet when you put them in there, that will happen, and you can put the substrate there to help instead of putting the log in. You'll notice this superficial colonization within 7 to 10 days, but you still want to leave it for a few months to make sure that the mycelium is able to penetrate these dense pieces of wood before you put it outside. Otherwise, it may stall out or contaminate. But this has been a great method so far of getting these Maitake logs colonized. And when you go to bury it, I've seen my friends have success putting it vertical or horizontal. You just want to have it in some loose fitting soil, and try not to bury it like 3 feet deep. That's too much. It's going to suffocate. But just bury the log just enough that it's covered, and the fruits will pop out. This was a lovely Grifola frondosa here, Hen of the Woods, that fruited the same year that the logs were made at one of my buddy's house. And right here at the end, this was a log that I left in the bag too long. It got too cold. As you can see, there's a bit of snow and ice on the ground. I didn't want to bury it, so I left it in the garage, and it started to fruit. So I'm going to clone this one and keep it going.